In Asia, there's a bridge that is way longer than you'd think should even be possible. The HZMB stretches 34 miles over open water, which makes it the longest sea bridge in the world. So if something this massive can make it across rough waters, why can't New Zealand just build a bridge between its two main islands? After all, we're talking about a distance of just 14 miles. And a bridge like that could seriously change life for both locals and tourists. People could just hop in a car and drive from Wellington to Picton. No more ferry hassles, no more drawn-out trips. Just one epic road journey with ocean views on both sides. So what's stopping them? Well, turns out, everything. I mean, building a bridge there is technically possible, but there are a couple reasons why experts are like, maybe not. Let's start with the obvious, the distance. The North Island and the South Island are separated by Cook Strait. Like I said, it's 14 miles wide at its narrowest point. That's not much, true. Plus, we've got the HZMB bridge, proving that, yep, it is technically possible to build a bridge over the sea to cover that distance. But we can't ignore the fact that New Zealand's geography is, well, a whole different ballgame. Cook Strait isn't exactly a calm, friendly stretch of water. It's deep, really deep. Parts of it drop to about 10,000 feet. That's like stacking 7 Empire State Buildings on top of each other. It's also a rough, moody stretch of ocean that loves tossing around ships like rubber ducks. In fact, quite a few have been wrecked in Cook Strait. And sadly, many lives were lost. You don't have to worry about it so much though, as the worst accidents happened a long time ago. The ships and ferries that cross it today are much safer. Even so, it'd be pretty hard to avoid getting seasick while crossing it. Things get even messier below the surface. The seafloor over there is uneven and unpredictable. What happens is that Cook Strait has opposing tides at each end, one where it meets the Tasman Sea and the other where it joins the Pacific Ocean. And they simply don't move together like you might expect. When the tide is high on one side, it's low on the other, and they're totally out of sync. So all that water rushes back and forth through the strait to balance things out, creating some really strong and messy currents in the middle. Then there's the weather. Cook Strait isn't just windy, it's probably one of the windiest places in the southern hemisphere. That's because it's located right in the middle of one of New Zealand's 3 big wind tunnels. Basically, there are places where the wind doesn't just come and go quickly. It sticks around, blowing hard for most of the year. And all of this happens because of something called the Roaring Forties. That's the name for the latitude band between 40 and 50 degrees south of the equator, where strong, persistent westerly winds are pretty common. Unlike the northern hemisphere, which has a lot of land at this latitude, the southern hemisphere is mostly ocean with just a few land masses, like New Zealand's South Island, Tasmania, and the southern tip of South America. So, these winds go wild because there's nothing to slow them down, and they just keep picking up speed. The gusts there can reach up to 150 miles per hour. So, imagine trying to cross a bridge in a car when the wind is actively pushing against you. That's not just unpleasant, it's super dangerous. Drivers can easily lose control of their cars with the wind pushing them sideways. And of course, that can lead to countless serious accidents. Now, let's talk about earthquakes. New Zealand sits right on the boundary of 2 massive tectonic plates, the Indo-Australian and Pacific plates. It's basically in the middle of a collision zone. And about 14,000 earthquakes happen in and around the country every year. Of those, only about 200 are big enough to be felt. Still, building a massive bridge under these conditions would require some serious genius-level engineering. With all that in mind, we can safely say that the whole bridge idea is off the table. But how about an underwater tunnel? Yep, that could work. It could be a great solution actually. No wind, no bad weather, and no earthquakes to deal with. There are a bunch of other advantages too. First, it would dramatically reduce travel time, cutting down the 3 to 4 hour sailing trip between the North and South Islands. that same journey would probably only take about 40 minutes. Then people wouldn't have to stress about all the ferry cancellations and delays because of bad weather. And most importantly, it's doable. I mean, look at the Channel Tunnel. It's an undersea tunnel connecting southern England and northern France. Japan did something similar with the Seikan Tunnel, which connects the islands of Honshu and Hokkaido. They are both huge projects, serving pretty much the same purpose. So why on earth isn't New Zealand already building this tunnel? Well, for the same reason we don't all live in luxury treehouses with personal robots: money. Estimates vary, but some experts think a project like this could cost anywhere from $10 to $20 billion. To cover that kind of cost, they'd probably need to charge tolls for the next 100 years. And trust me, those tolls wouldn't be cheap. Other experts think it could actually cost more than that. Because you see, we have to consider all the extra infrastructure. The narrowest point of Cook Strait is between the North Island and Arapawa Island. That's one of the long, mountainous regions in the Marlborough Sounds, which is pretty remote. So it's not just about the cost of the bridge or tunnel itself, it's also the access roads, safety systems, maintenance, and evacuation plans. You can't just build a huge underwater tunnel and not plan for the occasional emergencies. And what would it actually be used for? Sure, there are people who travel between the islands. About 1 million passengers take the ferry every year. But that's not exactly the kind of traffic that justifies the most expensive infrastructure project in the country's history. Earlier, we talked about how England and Japan have similar underwater tunnels. But there's something to consider. The United Kingdom has a population of 69 million. Japan has even more, with around 123 million people. And in New Zealand, they've only got 5 million residents to pay for this project. So could they have a tunnel under Cook Strait? Sure they could. Should they? Probably not. If you don't want to fly, the only other way to travel between the islands is by ferry. It's not ideal, but hey, it works. New Zealand has a total of 5 ships that transport people and vehicles across the islands. For tourists who aren't in a rush, it's perfect. You can cross the islands while taking in some of the most stunning views and spotting amazing wildlife. You'll start your trip in Wellington, and right from there, you'll see the rugged North Island coastline as you head out into open water. You might see different seabirds like gulls and terns, and as you get closer to the South Island, you might spot some gannets. If you're lucky, you could also catch a glimpse of the seal colonies off the coast. During the last hour of the trip, the ferry will slow down, giving you plenty of time to enjoy the green hills and calm waters. You will also approach Queen Charlotte Sound, a spot known for its wildlife. So keep an eye out for orcas, playful dolphins, and even penguins. Honestly, having a ferry instead of a tunnel might not be so bad after all. You're chilling in Hawaii, on the island of Oahu. A friend calls you up. Hey, I'm here too. Meet me in Maui. Great, but how do you get there? Your first thought is probably to take a ferry, but that's impossible. Hawaii is a pretty unique place. It's the most expensive state to live in. It has its own official language besides English. And it's the only American state made up entirely of islands. Hawaii has a total of 137 islands. 8 are the main ones, but only 6 are open to tourists. And the distance between those islands is probably bigger than you'd expect. For example, traveling from Oahu to the Big Island is around 185 miles, which is about the same distance as Chicago to Indianapolis. You might be surprised that you can't make that trip by boat. In fact, the only ferry system that actually takes passengers in Hawaii runs between Maui and Lanai. That's it. So your only option is to travel between islands is by plane. Honestly, it's a little surprising, especially considering how many people visit Hawaii every year. Tourism pretty much drives their economy, and in the first 8 months of 2024 alone, over 6 million people visited its beautiful beaches. Knowing that, we would expect Hawaii to set up a good ferry system to make it easier for visitors to get around. Just like in Greece. This would probably boost tourism even more, bringing more money to the state. But believe me, authorities and private companies also know that. In fact, they've already tried it. Ferries were a big way of getting around in Hawaii from the 19th century up until the 1950s. Since then, there have been a few attempts to bring back a ferry service, but unfortunately, they have all failed. One of the biggest attempts was the Hawaii Super Ferry, which aimed to provide a fast, affordable boat service between islands. It could carry almost 900 passengers and even allow them to bring their own cars along. The trial run started in 2007, and people were excited, but it turned into a big fiasco. A bunch of legal and environmental issues came up, like concerns about the impact on marine life, especially whales. The courts decided the ferry didn't go through the proper environmental reviews, and that caused a lot of trouble. By 2009, after tons of protests and setbacks, they had to shut it down. If a project like this comes up again, it will probably fail one more time. And there are a few reasons why it's almost impossible to set up a regular ferry system there. Let's start by talking about Hawaii's rough waters. They are deep and wild. Take the Alenoiaha Channel, for example. It's a 30-mile stretch that separates Maui from the Big Island. Its name means Great Billow Smashing Channel, and it lives up to that. It's over 6,000 feet deep, making it one of the most dangerous stretches of water on Earth. The wind there is also super strong, the fastest in Hawaii's coastal waters. But it's not any easier in the rest of the archipelago. The whole region gets hit by storms from the Pacific up north, sending big waves crashing into the islands and making the waters rough and unpredictable. Swells can come from 3, 4, or even more directions, making the sea feel really choppy. Someone who's not used to taking ferry boats would definitely find that, well, uncomfortable, to say the least. To deal with rough seas like this, the ferries have to be really big and strong. But that also makes them more expensive and harder to run than the ones in places like Alaska or Washington State. Another reason it's so tough to set up this system today has to do with marine life. A big ship moving through the shallower waters when docking could really damage the local ecosystem. And there's also the problem that the sea routes are also the migration paths of many sea animals, like humpback whales and spinner dolphins. Not to mention, ferry services can make it easier to spread harmful plants and animals, what experts call invasive species. See, Hawaii's ecosystem is super unique because it's been isolated out in the middle of the Pacific. When we talk about plants and animals that are native to Hawaii, we mean they got there on their own, no humans involved. They arrived with the help of waves, wind, or even birds flying over. But events like these are super rare, so for over 70 million years, their plants and animals didn't have to deal with outside competition. That's made them really fragile. So, when new species get brought in by us, it can be a big problem, and they could end up harming the environment. Hawaii's already been battling invasive species like fire ants, coqui frogs, and meconium, a fast-growing plant from South America that takes over native forests. People there worry that ferries, which carry cars and cargo between islands, could accidentally spread these invaders even more. Like we mentioned at the beginning of the video, the long distances between their lands don't really help either. For example, if you were to travel from Oahu to the Big Island of Hawaii by boat, it would take around 30 hours, and that's without any stops. The same trip by plane takes about 50 minutes. Ferries that cover long distances are much more expensive, so they need a much bigger demand to make them profitable. On top of that, the state doesn't really have the infrastructure, like enough ports and terminals to support the operations. So setting up new routes is pretty much out of the question. Airplanes, on the other hand, are a different story. The air travel industry in Hawaii is already well established and super competitive. That means flying is still the most practical option in Hawaii. Planes are quick, they don't make you seasick, and are pretty affordable, usually costing around $100 for a round trip. Okay, but what do the locals think about all this? Well, apparently, there isn't a huge demand for residents to commute between the islands all that often. Oahu is the busiest island in Hawaii, with about 70% of the state's population living there. It is where Honolulu, the capital, is located, and where most of the state's business happens. So, people from the other islands usually come over for a specific doctor's appointment or to catch a big concert. And that might happen once or twice a year, no more than that. So, even if people could choose between taking a ferry and a plane for these special occasions, most of them would probably still prefer flying. There are plenty of options between the main island airports. Planes usually start flying around 5 in the morning, and there are flights available every hour until the last one, which is usually at 9 in the evening. If you've been dreaming of going to this paradisiacal place but are worried about spending too much on plane tickets, I have some tips for you. First off, keep in mind that visiting all the main islands in 5 days or less is way too ambitious. So, if you don't have much time to spend there, think about your priorities. Each of the 6 islands open to tourists has its own vibe and activities. But you don't need to visit them all in one trip, and you can save some money by sticking to fewer islands. You can still explore the diversity of the islands by picking 2 that offer a nice contrast to each other. For example, while Oahu has that bustling city energy, Kauai has a much more relaxed vibe. Also, flights in the morning are usually cheaper, and it might be better to fly on a weekday rather than the weekend, although the price difference isn't usually huge. Hopefully these tips will save you some cash while still having an unforgettable island hopping adventure in Hawaii. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who's also dreaming of exploring these amazing islands.
So look at this narrow passage between the north of Morocco and the southern part of the Spanish region. It's called the Strait of Gibraltar. There are only 8 miles between the 2 continents, but for some reason, there's no bridge, despite people having been dreaming for centuries about connecting these 2 regions. There are places in the world where a bridge over water stretches for a much greater distance. For example, the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway near New Orleans, Louisiana, goes for 24 miles, which is 3 times the length of the hypothetical bridge between Africa and Europe. That's listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest continuous bridge passing over water. It consists of 2 parallel bridges and connects the urban area of New Orleans with small settlements in the north of Lake Pontchartrain. 9,000 concrete piles hold more than 1,000 decks above the water. This large-scale structure was built in the middle of the 20th century. It only took 14 months from the start of construction to its completion. American engineers created a unique technology for attaching concrete piles to the base of the bridge, and this bridge is still functioning. So, what's the problem with building a shorter bridge to connect Africa and Europe? Let's first find out the value of the 8-mile bridge that could connect 2 continents and the reason why everyone is talking about it. In fact, the value of such a bridge would be enormous. Diamonds, oil, minerals. Africa is full of valuable materials, and Europe is happy to buy these things. This theoretical bridge could allow people to transport things for trade quickly and comfortably. But now, the exchange of goods between Africa and Europe is only possible thanks to airplanes and cargo ships, and airplanes are extremely expensive because of hefty fuel price tags. In addition, air travel is often delayed because of bad weather. There are long customs procedures and transportation from the airport to the destination. Ships can also be a problem. The narrow area of the Mediterranean Sea, where the 2 continents are closest to each other, is a dangerous place because of storms and strong currents. The transportation of your diamonds is highly dependent on weather conditions. The second advantage of such a bridge would be the creation of tens of thousands of jobs. People from Europe and Africa would build hotels, ports, parks, and even small towns for each other. The coastal parts of both continents would become a new economic center. And just imagine how much investment those places would attract. Europe and Africa would be much closer than ever before. You could drive from a small Spanish town to a safari park in northern Morocco, buy Moroccan tea, get some argan oil, and go home for the evening. Or you could take a high-speed train across the beautiful Mediterranean Sea. People would open hundreds of restaurants, amusement parks, shopping malls, and a museum next to this bridge. But, unfortunately, it's impossible to build such a bridge, at least at the moment. And here's why. The main problem is the Strait of Gibraltar itself, because of its strong currents and seismic activity. How can you start large-scale construction if, in a couple of days, an underwater earthquake can trigger giant waves and take all the ships underwater? Even if you build a bridge, rapid streams of water that constantly change direction can shake the entire structure and tear the connecting parts of the construction. The bridge over the Strait of Gibraltar must have a strong, sturdy system that will withstand seismic activity. Huge resources are required to create such a complex structure. Despite the dangerous passage between the two continents, it remains one of the busiest points in the world. It's the only place on the planet connecting the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. About 300 ships pass through this area every day. Not only merchant ships, but also fishing vessels and tourist boats. There are not so many places in the world where you can watch whales coming out of the water. Not only people, but also marine creatures often visit this passage because of the peculiarities of the sea currents. But we'll talk about that later. Another problem is the depth of the strait. In simple words, any bridge over the water is built on long metal piles. Builders and engineers stick piles into the seabed and use them as a holding base for the whole construction. But installing such piles firmly enough is a difficult task because of the uneven seabed. The seabed has a unique geological landscape, irregularities, and different densities of the Earth's rock. There are also reefs, rocks, and pits. Any seabed requires extensive geological studies before piles are installed. However, the bottom of the Strait of Gibraltar is especially difficult because of its depth, almost 3,000 feet. It's one of the deepest straits in the whole world. Just imagine, you'll need the height of 10 Statues of Liberty to reach the surface of the water from the bottom of the strait. What kind of pile should be used there to hold the entire bridge? Most likely, one pile will have to consist of several parts connected into one large metal rod. And don't forget about seismic activity. Let's say you've installed perfectly strong piles, but the next day an earthquake occurs and destroys the entire structure. And a strong current is carrying fortifications all over the Mediterranean Sea. The next problem is probably the most important one, because it concerns marine life. The Strait of Gibraltar has a high salt content. This natural element makes water heavier and makes it descend to the bottom of the deep Mediterranean basin. Then, this salt water pushes up cold water from the seabed into the Atlantic Ocean. These changes in water density, as well as fast currents, create sea vortices and turbulence. It's like a raging cauldron of cold water that raises a lot of nutrients to the surface. The hollows and hills of the Strait of Gibraltar are filled with different substances and sunlight, and this creates ideal conditions for the formation of phytoplankton. Whales, dolphins, and other marine creatures adore this delicacy. That's why you can see about 7 species of whales and dolphins in this place. What might happen to phytoplankton after the start of global construction? Carbon dioxide, crushed rock, tons of dust and ashes, falling building materials – all of this could significantly pollute the environment. Without phytoplankton, many fish would go extinct. Without fish, thousands of fishers wouldn't be able to get food and earn money. But even if the bridge was built, cars and trains would continue to pollute the air and water. This disruption of the delicate balance in this narrow strait can lead to larger-scale environmental disasters. Dolphins and whales may leave to look for food elsewhere, and thus take resources from other marine inhabitants. Like falling dominoes, one problem can follow another. And all this because of one bridge. In 2007, the Spanish Ministry of Environmental Protection introduced speed limits for all ships sailing through the strait in order to not disrupt the delicate balance of nature. At the beginning of the 20th century, a French engineer proposed a project of a bridge, but it was rejected because it was too complicated and costly. People also tried to develop a 23-mile-long tunnel, but this project also faced financial and technical difficulties. People are still dreaming of a bridge over the Strait of Gibraltar. Perhaps, in the future, when we develop cooler technologies, we'll be able to build this thing. Oh, by the way, there hasn't always been water between these two regions. In the distant past, the two continents were connected. The entire Mediterranean Sea is the remains of the Tethys Sea that existed before the era of dinosaurs. Then the African and Indian plates collided with the Eurasian one, and the Tethys Sea completely disappeared. In its place, a land bridge was formed that separated the Mediterranean Sea from the ocean. Without access to water, the sea dried up about 6 million years ago. But then, when the bridge came down, the water began to fill the dried-up pool. For tens of thousands of years, the narrow plate sank lower and lower, and the Mediterranean Sea eventually got its current water levels. So it turns out that you can't drive between South America and North America, and there's a simple reason for that. There are no roads connecting the two continents, not even a rudimentary one. Technically, you could try your luck crossing on foot, but let me tell you, that would be a huge mistake. The region that connects the two continents is called the Darian Gap. It stretches across southern Panama's Darian province and the northern part of Colombia. The only land route there is a 60-mile jungle trek. Crossing it can take anywhere from 3 to 10 days. It depends on weather conditions, how much you're carrying, and honestly, just pure luck. Chance plays a big role here, because this isn't some chill, relaxing nature walk. It's a harsh, extreme environment, known for being completely isolated and one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Still, people seem to forget that and go there anyway. Every year, the number of people crossing just keeps growing. In 2014, fewer than 10,000 people crossed the gap. In 2023, that number increased to 520,000. Now, you might be wondering, what are so many people doing in the middle of the two American continents, risking all that danger? Well, that's because the Darian Gap has become a route for refugees migrating to North America. But to get there, they face all kinds of dangers, from insect bites and infections to serious fractures. We're talking about a no-man's land. Since there are no police stations, immigrants must also watch out for thieves. Along the way, they have no choice but to rely on and support each other. Most people start the crossing with at least a tent or tarp, rain boots, water, and some food. But these things get heavy fast, and people normally can't carry enough supplies for the entire journey. At some point, people start drinking river water to avoid dehydration. But the water's full of bacteria and dirt, so it causes intestinal issues. And if things get serious, there's no medical help there. To make this whole scenario even worse, the temperatures are brutal, often hitting over 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, a small subset of people who venture through the Darian Gap are hardcore adventurers and travelers looking for a survival experience in the jungle. But this region is no place for a relaxing vacation. A group of tourists who went there in 2023 ended up getting jungle rot, a fungus that affects the feet. The situation got so bad that a woman had to be carried out by the group on the last day because she couldn't walk. No matter how prepared people are for the Darian Gap, in the end, survival mostly comes down to luck. Out there, travelers won't find cities with solid infrastructure where they can crash at a hotel and gear up for the next day. In some spots, they might stumble across basic camps right in the jungle. These camps might offer wooden platforms for tents, bucket showers, toilets, and even plates of chicken and rice. But it all comes at a price. Wi-Fi, for example, might cost $2 an hour, and that seems like a pretty good deal, considering there's no cell phone service on the trail. They pretty much lose all contact with the outside world. Now picture a dense rainforest with steep, muddy terrain. The hiking trail is littered with boulders and tangled with vines, like nature's own tripwires. It climbs sharply over a mountain, becoming a serious challenge even for someone in good physical shape. The area also gets constant heavy rainfall, which can lead to landslides, flash flooding, and extremely muddy conditions. The situation gets so intense that even the t-shirts and faces of those who make the crossing end up covered in mud. They'll also have to cross a lot of fast-moving rivers. A Venezuelan dad who recently went through the area with his 2 kids said their sneakers ripped apart on the very first day. That's how powerful the rivers can be. And they're deep, too. Sometimes the water reaches all the way up to their shoulders. But the dangers in that area aren't recent. For centuries, the Darian Gap was thought to be impossible to cross. The first Europeans who ventured into Latin America saw it as kind of a jungle training school. They totally knew about its dangers, but still, many adventurers tried to make the crossing in the years that followed. In 1854, for example, an expedition disappeared for 49 days in the jungle, battling starvation and exhaustion. Then again, in 1870, a group of 100 men set out to cross it. Even though they were well prepared and carried cutting-edge equipment for the time, they still suffered tremendously during the journey. They had to rely on incredible resilience to survive the challenge. Over the years, people who ventured in often ended up passing away from hunger, thirst, and even drowning in rivers. They also faced the risk of being attacked by dangerous animals like jaguars, white-lipped pecaries, and the fer-de-lance, a fast, irritable snake that is one of the most venomous out there. The area is also swarming with mosquitoes, which can spread serious health problems. Leaning against trees to rest can also be risky. This jungle is full of spiked chunga palm trees, which are covered in long black spines up to 8 inches long. Unfortunately for us, these spines are covered in all sorts of bacteria. Just brush against a chunga, and you could end up with infected wounds. And yet another danger is getting lost in the dense forest and never finding your way back to safety. These days, though, this risk is a lot lower. Some people have mentioned color-coded markers that help guide travelers and keep them from going the wrong way. If they see blue or green fabric tied to trees, it means keep walking. But if they spot red fabric, that's a sign they're going the wrong way and need to turn around quickly. Since there are so many dangers, why not just build a road through the Darian Gap? While it might seem like a good idea, building a road connecting Panama and Colombia isn't really that simple. The Darian Gap has a humid climate, tough terrain, and constant rainfall, which means any attempt to build a functional road would be highly challenging and super expensive. Even though there have been previous attempts to fill in the gap. See, there's a huge road system called the Pan-American Highway, which stretches all the way from Alaska to the southern tip of Argentina. Nowadays, this highway hits a roadblock right at the Darian Gap. But it wasn't supposed to be like this, as the original idea was for the road to go through there. Leaders from Latin American countries tried to make this plan happen in the 70s, and then again in the 90s. But a lot of people were against it, mainly because they wanted to protect the local communities and the rainforest. Since the Darian Gap is mostly untouched by humans, it's one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. It's believed that 1 in 5 species are endemic to the region, meaning they only exist in that specific area, like the Darian pocket gopher and the slatty slender mouse opossum. A road would have really damaged the ecosystem in the area, so the plans were scrapped. Eventually, an alternative was created to travel by sea. At least 2 companies started a ferry service connecting the 2 countries. However, the business wasn't profitable, and they ended up shutting down. Not long ago, Panama decided to close the Darian Gap route. Now they're sealed off with barbed wire fencing. It might just be a matter of time before other routes are created. But if you are an adventurer looking to visit South America, it's probably not best to wait for that. Traveling by plane to Colombia will always be a much safer option.
This invisible line divides the world into two parts, and most animals, fish, and birds, for some reason, can't cross it. The line is called the Wallace Line, and it runs between Australia and Asia. It has its name after Alfred Russel Wallace, a British scientist and explorer who discovered it in 1859. He traveled to Asia to explore a group of islands called the Malay Archipelago. As Wallace walked through the jungles, climbed hills, and sailed on boats, he noticed something like an invisible wall. On its west side, in places like Borneo and Sumatra, he saw animals you might find in Asia. There were big rhinos munching on leaves and monkeys swinging from tree to tree. The forests were full of life, with all kinds of animals you'd expect to see in a jungle. But in places like Sulawesi and Lombok, just across the imaginary line he came up with, Wallace found animals more like the ones in Australia and colorful birds like cockatoos. The behaviors of animals differ on different sides of the Wallace Line. Some creatures are great at traveling across tough barriers like water, but others are not. For example, bats can fly across open water, but they sometimes cross the Wallace Line. On the other hand, big animals that live on land like elephants usually stay on just one side of the line. Some birds are shy and like to stay hidden in thick bushes and trees to avoid predators. They wouldn't feel safe flying over wide stretches of water with no place to hide. Plants don't stick to the Wallace Line as strictly as animals do, because they spread in their own unique ways, like with seeds carried by the wind, water, or animals. One plant genus, the eucalyptus, mostly stays on the Australian side, but one eucalyptus tree has made its way to the Philippines on the Asian side. Underwater, the Wallace Line doesn't matter as much. The area between the Wallace Line and Australia is called the Coral Triangle, and it's bursting with life. Now, after more than 150 years, scientists think they finally have an explanation of the Wallace Line mystery. They believe it all started about 35 million years ago, when Australia broke away from Antarctica and slowly moved up to crash into Asia. When this happened, the crash created a chain of islands called the Malay Archipelago between Asia and Australia. This caused extreme changes in the weather, which made the area very different and affected which animals could live there. Researchers used a computer model that looked at how more than 20,000 species of animals from both sides of the Wallace Line would have behaved millions of years ago. When Australia started to drift away from Antarctica, it opened up a huge new era of deep ocean around Antarctica. This is where the biggest ocean current on Earth, called the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, began to flow. This swirling current made the planet's climate much cooler and completely changed how animals could live in different places. But not all animals were affected in the same way. Indonesia stayed warm and rainy, which was perfect for animals from Asia. These creatures could hop from island to island like stepping stones and make their way toward Australia. But animals from Australia had a harder time. Over millions of years, they had gotten used to living in cooler, drier places, so the tropical islands didn't suit them as well. Scientists believe if we can see how animals adapted to big changes in weather patterns millions of years ago, we might be able to predict how today's animals will cope with a similar situation. Other scientists after Wallace also tried to describe and explain the invisible natural border between Asia and Australia, and came up with their lines. The Weber Line, for example, is in a slightly different location than the Wallace Line, between the Oriental and the Australasian faunal regions within Wallacea. It's a group of mainly Indonesian islands that are separated by deep water straits from the Asian and Australian continental shelves. They were never connected to the big continents by land, so animals that could swim, fly, or float across the water made it to these islands. That's why the creatures living there are so unique and come from both Asia and Australia. Weber's line is where the balance tips. If you go one way, most of the animals are from Asia. If you go the other way, most of the animals are from Australia. Another important migration event in the history of our planet happened in the Americas. Around 30 million years ago, South America became a separate landmass as tectonic plates moved and pulled it away from Antarctica and Africa. Once it was on its own, the animals living there started to evolve in unique ways and turned into creatures you couldn't find anywhere else in the world. There were animals we still see today, like opossums, giant rodents like capybaras and chinchillas, armadillos, anteaters, and sloths. Some of the animals from those times are now extinct. There were giant ground sloths, bigger than cars, roaming around. There were glyptodonts, which were like giant armadillos with super tough, bony shells. There were also huge, scary birds that couldn't fly but could chase down their prey. Up in North America, animals could still travel to other parts of the world through the Bering Strait. So North America was full of different animals like deer, bison, horses, camels, and even mammoths and mastodons. They all lived alongside predators like big cats, wolves, and bears. About 3 million years ago, the continents of North and South America got connected by a strip of land called the Isthmus of Panama. It formed because the tectonic plates shifted again. Some major volcanic activity between 25 million years ago also contributed to the process. Animals started to move between North and South America, and this long process went down in history as the Great American Interchange. During the Ice Age, huge glaciers in the north grew and shrank over tens of thousands of years. When the glaciers were at their biggest, they held so much water that the sea levels dropped, and forests probably turned into wide grassy plains. So animals had the perfect conditions to cross over. Giant ground sloths were among the animals that went up north from South America, all the way to Alaska. One special kind even roamed the chilly tundras alongside woolly mammoths and caribou. Lots of North American predators decided to explore the South. There were cats like cougars, jaguars, and saber-toothed tigers with their giant teeth. Wolves, foxes, otters, raccoons, and bears also joined the migration. The short-faced bear could stand up to 13 feet tall and weigh as much as a small car. South America also had some funny-looking animals called sanus, or South American native ungulates. These were hoofed mammals that evolved into all kinds of weird shapes, while South America was isolated. Big animals from North America, for example, relatives of elephants with strange tusks, came to the south and became some of the largest creatures around. The ancestors of today's llamas settled in the Andes Mountains, and deer, tapirs, and peccaries thrived in the forests. Animals kept moving back and forth between the continents for thousands of years. But as the Ice Age ended, many of the bigger animals, like the giant ground sloths, couldn't adapt and disappeared. It seems North American animals were better at adapting to their new homes. You can find armadillos, porcupines, and opossums from South America in North America. But many of South America's most famous animals like jaguars, llamas, and spectacled bears left North America long ago. Scientists think South America's animals, after being isolated for millions of years, had a harder time dealing with new challenges when their ecosystems changed.
Name a desert. Let me guess. Sahara? Well, actually, no matter which one you thought of, I'm sure of one thing. It's located somewhere below this line. See, when we hear the word deserts, we usually picture dry, sandy, blazing hot places, and there's not a single one of those above 45 degrees north latitude, or below 45 degrees south. In the south, that kind of makes sense. I mean, if you leave out Antarctica, there's not a whole lot of land down there. But things are different above 45 degrees north. There are tons of land. countries like Canada, France, the United Kingdom, and a bunch of others. And still, not a single desert. Actually, not a hot desert. Most of the major hot deserts are up in the northern hemisphere, near the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. And the hottest ones are usually found between 15 and 30 degrees north or south of the equator. Just like the Sahara, where average high temperatures can reach up to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Together, hot deserts cover almost 15% of the Earth's land area. But if our planet is packed with them, why doesn't a single one appear above this line? I mean, the 45 degrees north latitude. I'll explain. Let's divide Earth into 5 main zones. The polar regions are located at both ends, north and south. Right here, we have the 2 temperate zones. And finally, right in the middle of the globe is the tropical zone. Now, the line we're talking about sits in the temperate zone, in a colder area. Because the farther you go away from the equator, the colder it gets. Actually, the average annual temperature drops about 1.2 degrees Fahrenheit for every degree of latitude you move north in the northern hemisphere. And cold weather is the main reason hot deserts don't form above this line. It turns out that as you move farther north from the equator, the sun's rays hit the Earth at a more slanted angle. That spreads the solar energy over a larger area, which means less heat is concentrated in one spot. Basically, these regions just don't get as hot. And it's one of the reasons why countries like Finland are much colder than Colombia, for example. Another reason temperatures are lower in this zone has to do with something called albedo. Basically, this term refers to the amount of sunlight that a surface reflects back. Let me give you an example. Every surface on Earth both reflects and absorbs sunlight, but in different amounts. Take snow, for example. It can reflect up to 90% of the sunlight that hits it and only absorbs about 10%. That's what gives snow a high albedo. And it's totally different with sand, which has a lower albedo. In places like the Kalahari Desert, down in southern Africa, it's about a 50-50 situation. Most of the year, roughly 50% of the sunlight gets reflected around there, and the other 50% is absorbed. The heat absorbed by the sand is part of why it gets so hot in dry places like deserts. I mean, hot deserts. Simply put, sand soaks up more heat, while snow reflects most of it. This is one of the reasons why snowy areas stay much cooler. So the closer you get to the polar zones, the easier it is for sunlight to be reflected instead of absorbed. And that helps explain why there aren't any hot deserts around those parts. Then, we also have atmospheric patterns. Let's just say that the air patterns change a lot once you go above that 45-degree line. That's because this region is controlled by a wind belt known as the Ferrel cell. Okay, so Earth has 3 main convection cells. You can think of them as big loops of moving air. Warm air rises, cools down, sinks, and then the cycle repeats. At the top and bottom of the planet, we have the polar cells. Right in the middle are the Hadley cells, and sandwiched between those two are the Ferrel cells. Now, everything that happens between these 3 cells can get a little complicated, but for today, the main thing to know is this. In those middle zones, the warm air that comes from the tropics meets the cold air from the polar regions. So, Ferrel cells play a big role in moving heat from the equator up toward the poles. This flow of warm air helps smooth out the temperature differences between the tropics and the polar regions. And that's what shapes the weather in places like North America, Europe, and parts of Asia. In the mid-latitudes, the Ferrel cell keeps the air moving around so much that hot, dry air doesn't really get a chance to settle. So, those regions end up with more moisture, more clouds, and even storms, rather than dry, desert-like weather. That's why you don't usually see hot deserts around 45 degrees latitude. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that the Ferrel cell makes the weather less stable. And that's very different from what happens in the Sahara Desert, for example. Over there, temperatures don't change all that much throughout the year. Just expect it to be hot. When you put all these factors together, it helps explain why hot deserts are mostly limited to the middle parts of the Earth, and why you'll never find a Sahara or Kalahari-style desert in places like Canada or Sweden. But that doesn't mean we don't have any deserts above the 45-degree line. Turns out, deserts don't always have to be hot and sandy. In fact, they can look like this. Yep, I'm talking about the Arctic. Because the actual definition of a desert isn't just some hot, dry, sandy place, it's really any area that gets very little precipitation. In other words, an area where it doesn't rain much. And it usually gets no more than 10 inches of precipitation per year. So no matter if the weather is hot or cold, deserts are really dry places with hardly any vegetation around. That makes it pretty tough for animals and plants to live in those environments. If you think about it, that means the biggest desert on Earth is Antarctica. It covers about 5.5 million square miles, just endless ice flats as far as the eye can see. It's also the coldest desert on the planet, even colder than the Arctic, which is the other polar desert. Temperatures there can drop as low as minus 128.2 degrees Fahrenheit. If you look at the Earth, about 33% of its land is desert. Now, pay close attention to the ones located between 15 and 30 degrees latitude. These are called tropical deserts. But can you notice something curious about their locations? Most of them are found on the western edges of continents. And there's a reason for that. Actually, 4 main reasons. First, the winds that bring rain usually blow from the east. When they move across the land, they drop most of the rain early on. By the time these winds reach the west side, they're dry, so there's no rain left for those areas. That already makes things pretty dry. Second, in the western margins of continents, the air usually goes down instead of up. When air goes down, it gets warmer and can't form clouds, so again, no rain. Third, if there are mountains nearby, they can block the rain too. One side of the mountain gets all the moisture, and the other side, called the rain shadow, stays dry. And lastly, the ocean near these places often has cold water. Cold water cools the air above it and makes it calm, so clouds don't form easily. No clouds means no rain. So when you put all of that together, it helps explain why those tropical deserts seem to prefer one side of the continent more than the other.
Scientists discovered something Atlantis-like near Australia. There used to be an entire continent that's now underwater. Here's what happened to it. Around 70,000 years ago, during the last ice age, there was a huge landmass called Sahul. It was located in the southwestern Pacific Ocean. This ancient supercontinent connected what we now know as Australia, New Guinea, Tasmania, and the Aru Islands into one giant piece of land. Imagine lush tropical rainforests surrounded by beautiful mountains. Sahul's tallest mountains were in the New Guinea highlands, with peaks reaching over 13,000 feet. This beautiful place was home to a variety of unique animals, most of which were pouched creatures. But back then, they weren't just koalas and kangaroos. Sahul was filled with different types of grazers, burrowers, scavengers, and predators. It was home to a huge diprotodon, a powerful hunter Thiosolio, and a horrifying Megalania, a creature that's much larger than any living lizard today. It was a unique place because the rest of the world was filled with placental animals at the time, like wolves, elephants, and humans. In Sahul, the only normal mammals were bats and rodents. But not all its parts were the same. The Timor, Arafura, and Carpentaria regions were covered by hot savanna and dry forests. It looked kinda like modern Australia, hot air deserts with scrubland, steppe, and temperate forests along the eastern coast. Back then, people were migrating all across the world. They made an incredible journey from Southeast Asia to Sahul and first arrived here from 60 to 45,000 years ago. They mostly traveled by foot and crossed the sea using bamboo rafts and simple boats. They came there from an ancient landmass called Sunda, which includes parts of Southeast Asia. They traveled across a series of islands known as Wallacea and eventually spread across Sahul. And it wasn't a small journey. Sahul was huge, around 4.1 million square miles. That's bigger than the USA or Canada. It stretched from the equator to around the southern part of New Zealand. So they arrived in what is now Australia and became Australia's first people. Scientists think that Sahul had a population of 500,000. We've discovered cave paintings that date back around 40,000 years. It's a hunting scene depicting an anoa, or miniature buffalo, facing figures of humans and animals. Researchers are trying to figure out how these early settlers moved across Sahul and where we might find archaeological evidence of their journey. To do this, they created a landscape evolution model. The simulation showed how Sahul changed between 75,000 and 35,000 years ago. It showed potential migration routes and archaeological sites. Humans likely traveled along coastlines and rivers. But how did Sahul get submerged off the coast of Australia, similar to the mythical Atlantis? During the last ice age, much of the Earth's water was locked up in large ice sheets and glaciers. The sea levels were much lower than they are today. After that, the global temperatures increased. The ice sheets melted and the sea levels rose, flooding the land bridges that once connected different parts of Sahul together. About 8,000 years ago, New Guinea separated from mainland Australia. And then, about 6,000 years ago, Tasmania did the same. We still can explore the underwater parts of Sahul thanks to new technology. Divers explore and collect samples directly from the ocean floor. Underwater drones can go to places that are too deep or dangerous for humans to explore. And with sonar mapping, scientists use sound waves to create maps of the ocean floor. It's like using an echo to see what's underwater. The sound waves bounce off the seabed and come back, helping us create a picture of what it looks like. Deep underwater, archaeologists have found stone tools and other artifacts. They also discovered fossils of animals like Diprotodon and Thylacoleo. By studying the underwater terrain of Sahul, they learned about the ancient rivers, lakes, and coastlines that existed during the Ice Age. But Sahul isn't the only underwater continent. Sahul isn't the only hidden gem of Southeast Asia. Take Sundaland, a place made up of Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and some other islands. This place was crazy huge during the Ice Age, but now almost fully underwater. Almost, but not entirely. The parts above the ocean are teeming with life. If you like birds, check this place out. It has almost a fifth of the world's bird species. You can spot colorful birds like the Java hawk eagle and the Bali starling among the lush forests. It's also a home to a fourth of Earth's fish species. Sundaland's waters are a haven for marine life, even the most exotic animals like the Asian arowanas. It's also a treasure trove of flowers. That's where you can find Rafflesia and Titan aurum, the world's largest flowers. This makes it very similar to Zealandia. Zealandia is a long, narrow piece of land about half the size of Australia. It broke from Antarctica about 100 million years ago. Just like Sundaland, it isn't fully underwater. 7% of it stayed above sea level. This sticking out little piece is what we now call New Zealand, along with Stewart Island and some smaller islands. These pieces of Zealandia are lush and warm. They're packed with volcanoes, mountain ranges, beautiful natural geysers, and hot springs. Local people, Maori, use these hot springs for cooking. People place corn, eggs, and vegetables in baskets and lower them directly in the hot springs. Sometimes they cook food in a pit oven using heated rocks. Another hidden world is known as Argoland. This mysterious landmass was once part of Australia, back when dinosaurs chilled around. It drove scientists crazy for decades. They knew it existed because it left a huge stretch on the ancient seafloor, the Argo Abyssal Plain. About 155 million years ago, it broke off from Australia, saying bye-bye. The continent drifted somewhere north, and when it reached Southeast Asia, it just vanished. Scientists had no idea where it went, but recently, they finally found its remains. Turns out, poor Argoland's lower parts started drowning into the Sunda Trench, a horrifyingly deep oceanic pit. The Earth's crust sunk into the mantle. Meanwhile, the upper parts of Argoland were pushed upward, grabbing the younger rocks on land. Because of this, Argoland broke apart into a bunch of smaller pieces. These pieces formed parts of Borneo, Java, Sulawesi, and other regions. The remains are buried under Indonesia and Myanmar. Imagine a colossal landmass the size of Greenland, Greater Adria. Its journey began about 240 million years ago when it broke away from the supercontinent Gondwana. It started moving north, and after 100 million years of enjoying the warm seas, it suddenly crashed into Europe and shattered into pieces. Most of these pieces went deep into the Earth's mantle, but some were scraped off and became part of mountain ranges like the Alps. Today, the remnants of Greater Adria are scattered across more than 30 countries, from Spain to Iran. That's why they're hard to look for. Seychelles was also once part of Gondwana. Yep, these idyllic islands are sitting atop of the ancient continent. We know a lot about it because of its fascinating granite outcrops. 100 years ago, Alfred Wegener discovered continental drift, but no one believed him. These granite outcrops helped him prove that he's not crazy and that tectonic plates really are moving. The Seychelles broke off from India and Madagascar and eventually became a sad loner in the Indian Ocean. This probably happened because of some insanely active volcanoes in the Deccan Traps. But now the islands are home to unique species both on land and in the coral reefs nearby. Mauritius broke off from India after the dinosaur wiping. Along its journey, it stretched into a long ribbon-like shape and also broke into pieces. Now it's all scattered beneath the Indian Ocean. Scientists stumbled upon this lost land by studying tiny ancient crystals called zircons. These zircons are like time capsules. They date back an astonishing 660 million to 2 billion years. That's even older than Mauritius itself. These ancient crystals hinted that there's another Atlantis somewhere nearby. Turns out there are hidden continents all around the world, and maybe we'll discover more of them in the future.
So get this, Taylor Swift takes a flight from Los Angeles to Tokyo that leaves at 10 a.m. on February 20th. She's on the plane for 12 hours, but she lands only at 2 p.m. the next day in Tokyo. That's a 28-hour difference. So, how did this time warp happen? Well, it's all because of this wonky line. This is the International Date Line. You know, that imaginary line that slices the globe in half and decides who gets to celebrate the new year first? It's the Line Islands, by the way. But crossing this line doesn't just make you feel like you've stepped into a transporter. It actually changes your day. Cross from east to west and boom, it's 24 hours later. If you travel in the opposite direction, crossing the line from the western side to the eastern side, you go back an entire calendar day. Now, you'd think that the International Date Line would be a nice, neat, straight line in the ocean where the time zones switch. But in reality, it's as if someone took a ruler and said, let's make this complicated. The line zigzags all over the place, wrapping around islands and causing all sorts of head-scratching confusion. For instance, Big Diomede Island and Little Diomede Island are only 2.5 miles apart, but have a 21-hour time difference. And things can get a little more complicated depending on which time zone a country follows. For example, if you travel 659 miles across the date line from Baker Island to Tokelau, you must add 25 hours. In other words, that's 1 day and 1 hour. And if that doesn't sound weird enough for you, wait, it gets crazier. When it's 6 o'clock in the morning on Thursday in New York, it's still Wednesday night in American Samoa. Meanwhile, over in Kiribati, it's already Friday. Yep, we're talking about 3 different calendar days happening at the same time because of this one imaginary crazy line. This phenomenon occurs every day between 10 o'clock and 10:59 in the morning. So, why does the International Date Line look so ridiculous in the first place? Well, great question. Although these zigzags may seem completely arbitrary, they actually have a logical basis. It's pretty much a made-up concept based on the Earth's rotation. The Earth is always spinning, thank goodness, and it takes about 24 hours, or a day, to complete one full rotation. To keep things in sync, people took the Earth and divided it into 24 time zones, each 15 degrees apart. But what is the starting point for a day on Earth? Well, basically, people needed to figure out which of these 24 zones or lines would be the starting line, or the chronocenter. They needed a reference point, a line where they could begin adding or subtracting time as you move east or west. That line is what we now call the prime meridian. But here's the catch. Deciding where to put this starting line, the prime meridian, is totally arbitrary. The idea of establishing a line where days begin and end goes all the way back to at least the 1300s. Back then, map makers were doing their own thing, picking their own east-west dividing lines called meridians, which, by the way, is just a fancy Latin word for midday. Without a universal standard for when a day officially started or ended, sailors on long voyages just had to wing it, figuring out how to handle the time they were gaining or losing along the way. So, in 1884, people decided to organize this whole mess. 25 nations gathered at the prestigious International Meridian Conference in the United States with one big goal: to decide on a line that would serve as the official prime meridian. Finally, like it or not, they were determined to create the international date line that the whole world would accept and would follow from that point forward. The prime meridian was established in Greenwich, England, and the international date line was placed on the opposite side, running through the 180th meridian. Well, sounds simple, right? But that's when the nightmare really began. The chosen international date line didn't just wander through uninhabited areas. Oh no! It split some countries in half and created all sorts of chaos. I mean, if you divide the world with a completely straight vertical line, you end up with situations where half of a country is one day ahead and the other half is one day behind. Take Kiribati, for example. The country is primarily centered in the Gilbert Islands, which sits just west of the international date line. However, in 1979, their territory got a little bigger with the Phoenix and Line Islands, which are way east of the date line. Suddenly, Kiribati was straddling the international date line. This created a bit of a headache for businesses. Folks on either side could only communicate by radio or phone for 4 weekdays a week. Now, to fix this quirky situation, Kiribati decided to skip Saturday, December 31st, 1994, right off the calendar. So Friday, December 30th, turned into Sunday, January 1st, 1995. And just like that, New Year's Day came a day early. Woohoo! After that, the date line moved eastward to go around the entire country. So the same thing that happened to Kiribati happened to other countries as well. For example, when they got to the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, the line made another detour to include them. And when they got south of the equator, well, guess what? Another eastward bend to cover even more islands. And that's pretty much why the straight line started to get a bit ziggy-zaggy. This wonky line is designed to avoid land as much as possible, so there's less hassle when it comes to changing days. So, no, you can't stand between the international date line, like having one foot in one day and the other in the next. But you can cross it by boat. In fact, some fancy trans-Pacific cruises even offer a time travel package for adventurous travelers who want to cross the line and jump into the future. Now, in the end, the international date line looks this ridiculous because it was constructed based on a series of arbitrary decisions, historical quirks, and a whole lot of confusion. But it's not just because people organized it in the 19th century that there is no confusion regarding time zones today. Another thing that the prime meridian establishes is Coordinated Universal Time, the famous UTC. Now, UTC never changes for daylight savings time or anything else. However, in 1908, Canada decided to spice things up by creating Daylight Saving Time, or DST. Their idea was to set the clocks 1 hour ahead of standard time to make better use of sunlight in the spring and summer and fall evenings. The idea was so brilliant that most countries jumped on board, but not everyone. Just look at Nepal. They have never ever used the daylight savings time, which means their clocks do not change throughout the entire year. As you probably know, countries with large territories often have more than one time zone. Just like the United States, which has 11 time zones. Australia has 9, while India is a special case. Look, India is a big country with an area that stretches around 1,800 miles from west to east. So it should have 3 time zones in total, but they only have one. This means that the sun rises almost 90 minutes earlier in Dong in the Far East than in Gujarmoti in the West. And why do they have only one time zone? Well, basically, because they can. Just remember that the international dateline and time zones are invisible, artificial, and now you know, totally arbitrary. So if a country wants to stick with just one time zone to simplify processes and business operations within its border, then hey, why not?
A bridge, a very helpful structure that traces back to the Neolithic times. The oldest bridge in the world, at least the one that is still standing, is the Arcadico Bridge, built more than 3,000 years ago. But there's a river you cannot cross using a bridge: the Amazon River, the largest and longest river in the world. Okay, the Nile River is actually the longest river in the world, but the Amazon wants both titles for itself. The Amazon River is born in Peru and crosses Colombia and Brazil until it reaches a massive delta at the Atlantic Ocean. Its waters travel a longer distance than Frodo and Sam, and yet not a single bridge has ever been built over it. Why is that? First of all, seasonal floods change the size of the river. During dry seasons, the Amazon is about 3 miles wide, but during heavy rains, it can get up to 30 miles wide in a few weeks. Not only that, but the flood also makes the river change its position. Now imagine trying to build a bridge in a place where the ground turns into water for about 4 months. Not an impossible task, but not the easiest one either. Now, if you look back at your geography classes, you might remember that the soil of the riverbank can be very soft, especially in the Amazon, which means it can erode and shift. Heavy rains also create marshes, a type of wetlands that actually reduces the magnitude of the floods and purifies the water. It's also home to many animals. This means that to build a bridge, part of this wetland would have to be drained, which would ruin the lives of all those animals. Besides, the foundations of said bridge would have to be deep, and that would cost a lot of money. The rain creates yet another problem for the potential bridge. It increases the river's water level by 13 to almost 50 feet. Of course, bridges have been built in deep rivers before, like the Padma Bridge, a gigantic structure with a foundation of 417 feet. But because the soil of the Amazon River can erode easily, a bridge would have to be built using floating structures, known as pontoons, and they're not helpful in a river that changes depth whenever it feels like it. Next on our list of things that are a problem to human endeavors is the Amazon rainforest. This forest spreads over 9 countries and is so big and so dense it could cover about half of Europe. This means that a bridge would almost likely connect one patch of the forest to another. A pointless improvement to the lives of capybaras and jaguars. Of course, the real users of such a bridge would be humans. Most people live around the tributaries of the Amazon River, not around the river itself, because who wants to live like a beaver at a dam? There's even a state called Amapá on the left side of the Amazon River that is completely cut off from the rest of Brazil. You could easily take your car and visit its neighbor, a place called French Guiana. But if you wanted to go to another part of Brazil, you'd have to find other means of transportation. Aside from small riverside populations that live right on the riverside, of the Amazon, bigger cities were built near tributary rivers, like the Rio Negro, which has a bridge, by the way, and the Nanay River in Peru. The bridges that go over the Nanay and the Rio Negro are the only 2 bridges over the rivers in the Amazon basin. The lack of good roads and highways inside the Amazon also makes the creation of bridges a pointless endeavor. Back in the 70s, humans had big ideas on how to explore the Amazon ever more, which is why they decided to build a highway which would cut the Amazon basin from left to right. The road, called the Trans-Amazonian Highway, was supposed to bring people to the heart of the Amazon. But it seems like the difficulties of building more than 2,000 miles of road inside a dense rainforest were not foreseen. Halfway through, the project was abandoned because it was super expensive and problematic. Nowadays, Highways in the Amazon basin are always flooded, filled with holes and mud. This whole situation creates a ripple effect. People don't live near the river because it's hard to access it. The roads don't go there either, because it's hard to build them. Which in turn makes even fewer people want to settle on the banks of the Amazon River, because they have no roads to get them there. So, if there are no roads and no bridges, how do people live there? You're not gonna believe this, but the riverside population uses a very old but reliable invention called a boat. The Amazon River is fully navigable, and the people that live there use it like a road. Much like motorcycles, cars, and buses, the Amazon River has canoes, speedboats, and ferries. There's even a very specific ferry called Obidense, transporting people to the municipality of Obidos, hence the name. Locals do everything on boats. They even have a boat hospital that floats around and visits riverside populations and a boat bank, so you can do all your bank-related things while looking at the vastness of the Amazon. Honestly, genius invention. The downside to this lack of bridges is that it stops us from exploring the truly hidden gems of the world. In the Amazon, for example, there are over 10,000 undiscovered archaeological sites. We may never be able to dig out stuff like fortified villages, geoglyphs, and many other structures. It would be pretty neat to go full-on Lara Croft in the middle of the Amazon, but these findings are tucked deep in the heart of the forest. At the same time, only on a boat are you able to witness the crazy phenomenon of the unmixed waters of the Rio Negro and the Solimões on the Amazon River. For more than 3 miles, these two tributaries of the Amazon River flow side by side without mixing. The speed and the temperature of these waters are different, so you'll see a river that looks like coffee and Coca-Cola mixed. This awesome phenomenon is called the meeting of waters. But the Amazon River is not the only river in the world deemed bridgeless. The Congo River, the second longest river in Africa, only has one bridge crossing it. The two Congos, yes, there are 2 different countries in the world named Congo, are separated by the Congo River, and so far, no roads connect them. Also, fun fact, some geologists believe that back when Gondwana existed and the continents were all cuddled together, the Amazon and the Congo River were one river connected to each other. Another place with a lack of bridges is the east side of the Thames in London. The west side of the river is narrower, which makes building a bridge easier. There are about 33 bridges on the west side alone, but if you want to cross the river from the east side, it's gonna be a hassle. The thing is, back in the 1800s, shipping companies decided that building too many bridges over the Thames was too expensive, because this was a shipping route and the bridges would have to be taller than usual. The structure would also have to be long, since some parts of the Thames are about 1,870 feet wide. But building long bridges is not a problem per se. In Rio de Janeiro, for example, you can find the Rio Niterói Bridge, which is about 8.26 miles long. Back when it was built in the 70s, it was the second longest bridge in the world. The bridge is so long that in 2018, a girl was born while her mother was crossing it, and now the birthplace in her birth certificate is literally the bridge. There's also no U-turn on it, so if you drive onto the bridge by mistake, you're in for a long drive. So next time you feel like exploring the Amazon, remember to pack your own boat. I guess it's no surprise that it's not that easy to just hop on a plane and literally fly to the South Pole, aka Antarctica. Sure, there are airports down there, but they're not really set up for commercial flights. So most people go to Punta Arenas International Airport in southern Patagonia, Chile, and then take a boat if they want to see some penguins. But not only is it hard to fly there, it's even harder to fly over there. When you're cruising at 30,000 feet, you probably don't think much about what's happening below. But it's pretty unusual for flights to go directly over the South Pole, and planes flying across Antarctica are quite rare too. Technically, it is possible. I've already mentioned that there are airports there. But even so, the infrastructure down there is still super limited. There simply aren't enough airports or refueling stations to support regular commercial flights, making it tricky to operate in such a remote area. Plus, there are only a handful of specialized cargo and transport flights that go in and out, and they exist to cater to those few folks who actually live in Antarctica. Then there's the weather that drives up the costs. The simplest example is that the pilots there need special training, which costs money, which is all because of the weather. Another hurdle is something called ETOPS. These rules dictate how far twin-engine planes can fly from an airport. Since there are so few airports in Antarctica, it's tough for pilots to stick to these regulations. Historically, ETOPS made it next to impossible to fly close to or over the South Pole, while flights over land have plenty of airports to choose from. Antarctica is a whole different ballgame. These days, some aircraft can fly up to 330 minutes or, in rare cases, even 370 minutes from an airport. But even with those extended limits, certain parts of the airspace above Antarctica are still off-limits. Still, in the grand scheme of things, that might not be a huge deal. The most curious of you must have Googled that already and found out that there really are Antarctic airways. Please do not judge fast, and don't say I wasn't right saying how hard it was to fly to the South Pole. Let me break it down for you. Antarctic Airways advertise as the world's most exclusive transcontinental flight, but don't think you can just waltz in and book a ticket anytime. For starters, Antarctic Airways mostly operates flights to King George Island from December to March, so it's not all year round. But there are many more reasons why these flights are unique. If you dig into their website, you'll find you've got two choices: a full day in Antarctica or an overnight adventure. Prices kick off at $5,500 for a day trip and go up to $6,500 for an overnight stay. And if you're considering a private charter, get ready to shell out a pretty penny. It's rumored to start at around $125,000. Sure, that's a steep price compared to your average cruise ship crossing the Drake Passage, but here's the thing. It's about 20 times faster. A cruise ship takes 2 days from Chile, while Antarctic Airways gets you there in just 2 hours. Air travel to Antarctica is pretty limited, likely due to the high costs, limited seating, and the logistical challenges that come with flying to such a remote location. Plus, flights can often be delayed because of bad weather. Most travelers opt for a quick day trip or an overnight stay on King George Island, usually aboard smaller Beechcraft King Air 300 aircraft. The experience typically includes a stroll to a research station and a boat ride to see nearby penguin colonies, but that's just scratching the surface of what Antarctica has to offer. But once you're aboard Antarctic Airways, you'll see it's just like a regular flight on a smaller plane. You'll be served meals that have received some pretty good reviews. There are even photos floating around online showcasing the food, and honestly, it looks awesome. Those who've experienced it say it's luxurious yet unpretentious. You'll get a mix of meats and cheeses, plus treats like tiramisu, salmon salad, a single after-eight chocolate, and a selection of quality street candies. Today, everything may seem cool and safe, but back in the day, there were some pretty tragic events. On November 28, 1979, Air New Zealand Flight 901 tragically collided with Mount Erebus on Ross Island, Antarctica. Unfortunately, all 237 passengers and 20 crew members aboard lost their lives that day. Since 1977, Air New Zealand had been running regular sightseeing flights over Antarctica. This particular flight took off from Auckland Airport in the morning, with plans to spend several hours exploring the stunning Antarctic landscape before heading back to Auckland via Christchurch that evening. Initially, the inquiry into the incident pointed the finger at pilot error. However, growing public concern led to the establishment of a Royal Commission of Inquiry for a deeper investigation. The commission found that the crash had been primarily due to a change in the flight path coordinates made the night before, which the flight crew hadn't been informed about. As a result, instead of being guided by the computer down McMurdo Sound, as they were led to believe, the aircraft was mistakenly redirected toward Mount Erebus. In a way, this flight looks like modern one-day Antarctic tours. Flight 901 was marketed as a unique sightseeing adventure, complete with a knowledgeable Antarctic guide who highlighted various scenic spots and landmarks through the plane's public address system, while passengers enjoyed a low-altitude tour of McMurdo Sound. These flights operated as day trips, taking off from New Zealand and returning on the same day. The plane departed from Auckland International Airport at 8 a.m., aiming to land in Antarctica, with a scheduled return to Christchurch International Airport by 7 p.m. The total journey covered about 5,360 miles, including a 45-minute stop in Christchurch for refueling and crew changes before completing the final 464 miles back to Auckland, arriving at 9 p.m. Back in November 1979, tickets for these flights were priced at $359 per person, which is over $2,150 in today's money. Anyway, this tragedy isn't the reason why planes don't fly over the South Pole. The real culprits are weather, ETOPS regulations, and of course, penguins. Yep, those cool, friendly little creatures. Friendly, at least according to researchers. With no natural predators on land, all of them are in the water. They're not really afraid of people and actually seem to enjoy our company. The South Pole is completely uninhabited and packed with penguins, making it pretty tricky to build anything down there. By the way, the North Pole actually allows planes to fly over it. Not too long ago, there were direct flights from Copenhagen to both LA and Tokyo, operated by SAS, and they cruised right over the North Pole. Other airlines joined in too. For example, Emirates ran a flight from Dubai to LA that took the same route. The difference in air traffic between the two poles mainly comes down to where people live and how much land there is. Roughly 88 to 90% of the world's population hangs out in the Northern Hemisphere, while only about 10 to 12% call the Southern Hemisphere home. Most folks in the South are clustered around the equator in places like Indonesia, Central Africa, and Brazil. When it comes to flights heading to the South Pole, options are pretty limited. You mainly have routes connecting New Zealand and Australia, parts of southern South America, and a few spots in southern Africa, especially South Africa. There aren't really any direct flights over the South Pole, though some flights can get close to Antarctica. One possible route could connect Auckland, New Zealand to Cape Town, South Africa, but there aren't any scheduled flights for that right now. The few flights that came close to Antarctica are operated by Qantas and LATAM Airlines, linking Australia with Buenos Aires and Santiago de Chile. In 2021, Qantas took a long detour over parts of Antarctica on a flight from Buenos Aires to Darwin, and in July 2023, they adjusted a route closer to the continent to dodge some fierce headwinds on a trip from Santiago to Sydney.
Experts explain Africa is splitting in two, and it will look like this. Up close, the process is even more shocking, with a massive crack stretching from Mozambique in the south to the Red Sea in the north. This gap keeps growing every year, tearing apart the land and destroying homes. Now, specialists believe the continent could split much sooner than we expect. Africa is breaking apart because of the Somali Plate movement. Think of it like a dramatic breakup happening with tectonic plates. On the east side, there's the Somali Plate. On the west, we have the Nubian Plate. And during this breakup, the Somali Plate just wants more space, so it's pulling away from the Nubian Plate. This movement is forming the East African Rift, a region where tectonic plates are splitting apart, magma keeps rising from deep below, and a bunch of active volcanoes are being born. So this place is hot, with daytime temperatures that can soar to 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and at night they cool down to 95 degrees. Inside this hot zone, we have the Afar Triangle, also known as the Afar Depression, and its geology is fascinating, as the rifting process is causing valleys, faults, and deep cracks to form in this region. Take, for example, this massive 35-mile-long fissure in Ethiopia's desert. It's also so wide that a person can easily fit inside of it. But what's scary is this crack keeps getting bigger, growing about a half an inch every year. The Nubian and Somali plates moving apart could also lead to a new ocean forming in Africa. This type of process isn't something new. About 150 million years ago, when dinosaurs were still around, a similar tectonic shift created the Atlantic Ocean. The continents were once all clustered together, but when a rift formed in what was Pangaea, it started pulling them apart, splitting the east and west hemispheres. So, a similar thing is happening with this gap in Africa. At some point, experts say the waters of the Indian Ocean might flood the East African Rift Valley, eventually creating a sixth ocean. Now, it's a pity you won't be able to swim in its waters during your lifetime, though. According to geophysicist Ken McDonald, who specializes in tectonic faults, this dramatic rupture could happen in 1 to 5 million years. Trust me, that's considered fast in geologic terms, and way sooner than most experts thought. Now, even though you won't get to watch Africa breaking apart, people there will still see and feel the signs. They might experience intense volcanic eruptions and strong earthquakes as this process slowly unfolds. One example is related to that scary crack in Ethiopia's desert we mentioned earlier. The fissure was created in 2005, after the area was hit by 2 volcanic eruptions and 163 earthquakes, each with a magnitude greater than 3.9. A crack this deep and long on Earth usually takes centuries to form, but in this case, it unfolded in just a matter of days. That's how powerful this event is. In fact, this kind of intense seismic activity can speed up the African splitting process, and that's why it's so hard to predict the exact time frame for the event. What we know is that people are already calling this new land the Nubian continent. If the predictions are right, it will include Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, and part of Ethiopia. That's exciting and concerning at the same time. As new coastlines emerge, countries will need to make major adjustments when it comes to infrastructure and land management. They might lose a lot of roads, houses, and other constructions currently located near or right in the East African Rift. In Kenya, for example, the fissures tore apart a busy road, and authorities desperately tried to fill the gap with rocks and cement. In another case, an old woman was sitting and eating with her family when her house suddenly split down the middle. Recently, earthquakes that happened near Ethiopia's Afar region demolished 37 schools and forced about 5,000 students to leave their classrooms. Unfortunately, stories like this could become more common over the next few years. But there is a positive side to all this. Countries located in the middle of Africa, like Zambia and Uganda, could gain coastlines, and that might be great for them. Having a coast means they would get access to new trade routes, opening fresh economic opportunities. Plus, think about the tourism boom. With all those newly formed paradisical beaches, these countries could become the next big gateway spot for travelers. The local ecosystem in this newly created ocean will change as well, and new marine species may emerge. So, let's look. This is the path where the rift is most advanced right now. I mean, we expect this is where Africa will eventually get separated. But things could get a little more complicated. Some time ago, Michael Daly, a geologist at the University of Oxford, suggested that this rift could extend further west. And some new evidence backs up his theory, pointing out that the crack could extend south through Botswana's heartland into South Africa, and west through Namibia, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. If these fractures widened into deep cracks, the ocean might come in and fill the gaps. Experts say Africa could split so much that it becomes an archipelago. But then again, we won't see that happening. It will take tens of millions of years for this to play out. We already know that Africa is at risk of breaking into a bunch of huge islands or small continents. The news isn't great for Madagascar either, as the world's 4th largest island could end up being split in half. But can the opposite process happen? I mean, can new land appear as the Nubian and Somali plates move apart? Well, as these tectonic plates get away from each other, the magma from the Earth's mantle might rise to the surface, and when it cools, it solidifies into new land. That's how other places in the world emerged, like Iceland and the Azores. So, yeah, the same process could happen in the East African Rift, and over the long term, it is possible that the rift could create new islands. For now, all we can say is that the geology of the Afar Depression is unique. It is the most active rift system on our planet. And when I say rift system, I mean a zone where tectonic plates are pulling apart. This region brings together all kinds of events, from faults in the Earth's crust to volcanic zones to the potential formation of a sixth ocean. For experts, it's like studying the evolution of rifts up close. And since it is such an active volcanic area, it also has enormous potential for tapping into geothermal energy, that is, using heat from inside the Earth to generate electricity. 2 geothermal power plants are already producing energy in Ethiopia, one in the Ethiopian Rift Valley and the other in the Afar. Now, geologists are exploring new potential spots. When we look at that deep crack in the ground, we know it's caused by tectonic plate movement. There's no mystery there. But what we still don't fully understand is why the cracks happen exactly where they do. For example, a crack that opened up in Botswana appeared after a magnitude 6.5 earthquake back in 2017. But the epicenter wasn't in the rift zone, where the plates are moving like we would expect. Instead, it was farther south. Since it's unusual for a rift to happen without volcanic activity, this fact really challenges our traditional ideas of how continents divide. Figuring out why these cracks appear in specific spots is still a missing piece of the puzzle for experts trying to explain how Africa is splitting. Hopefully, we get some answers before the continent turns into a massive archipelago.
You could wake up in New York, grab a bagel for breakfast, hop on a train, and by lunchtime, you'd already be in London enjoying fish and chips. What sounds like every tourist's dream could be a reality soon. Right now, traveling between these two cities usually takes about 8 endless hours by plane. But a high-speed train zipping through a massive transatlantic tunnel could make the same journey in just 54 minutes. The plan is to construct this train beneath the Atlantic Ocean, so the stations would look like those trendy underwater restaurants. Not only would you get to Europe in record time, but you wouldn't have to deal with jet lag or feel sick from turbulence. So far, this mega project sounds amazing, but can we really pull this off? Well, that's the million-dollar question. Actually, it's more like a $20 trillion question. That's how much this train and its futuristic underwater stations would cost. It's hard to imagine anyone having enough money to construct it, so specialists thought it was out of the question. But people started feeling hopeful again when Elon Musk dropped this announcement. He said not only is this kind of transportation possible, but his company could make it happen for 1,000 times less than everyone thought. Traveling between New York and London in less than an hour means the train would have to hit a jaw-dropping speed of 3,000 miles per hour. Yep, 3,000. That's about 5 times faster than the cruising speed of a commercial airplane like a Boeing 747. So, how is this even possible? Well, it's not an average tunnel. We're talking about a vacuum-sealed tube underwater, which cuts out air resistance, letting trains zip through at insane speeds. And it's not just any train. It's more like a high-tech aerodynamic capsule that levitates and moves thanks to magnetic propulsion. At least that's what experts think, since this kind of technology is already in use today with the fastest public train in the world, the Shanghai Maglev. This machine runs in China and hits a top speed of 186 miles per hour. What's crazy is that its locomotives are not even touching the tracks. They're literally levitating and floating just about 0.4 inches above the ground. This line takes people from Shanghai to Pudong International Airport, so travelers don't have to worry about traffic and can get to their flights super fast. This cutting-edge technology makes a 19-mile trip take just 8 minutes and 10 seconds. With a regular train, that same journey would be about 4 times longer. Back in 2001, people worked hard over 2 years to construct the maglev train, and they also spent a lot of money, as the whole project cost over $1 billion. Despite that crazy initial price tag, keeping this line running is not as expensive as it might seem. It's actually cheaper to operate than regular trains. Since the maglev doesn't touch the tracks, that means a lot less wear and tear and way lower maintenance costs. On top of that, its propulsion system is impressively energy efficient. As we've already mentioned, this is the fastest operational train in the world. But China isn't stopping there. They're likely to break their own record soon, having already unveiled a prototype of their next generation train, the CR450. This sleek silver bullet had reached test speeds as high as 281 miles. If this project comes to life, if people really start using it on a daily basis, it will be a game changer for high-speed rail. And it could shrink the journey between Beijing and Shanghai to less than 3 hours. That's like 1 hour less than what people take when traveling on today's high-speed train. Now, the team just needs to run a couple more tests to ensure it meets all necessary standards for commercial operations. This car looks like a Batmobile, and it's probably just as powerful. Say hello to the amazing Koenigsegg Jesko Absolute. Its sleek, futuristic design isn't just for show. Every detail on this machine was crafted to cut through air with precision, reducing drag and turbulence while boosting its high-speed performance. Experts ran the first computer simulations, and the Jesko Absolute hit an astonishing 311 miles per hour. But the team is positive that it can go even faster. This beast comes close to the cruising speed of small jets, and because of that, it smashed all records and became the fastest car in the world. When you visit the Coventry Transport Museum in England, you'll come face to face with a terrestrial vehicle that looks more like a rocket than a car. Meet the Bloodhound LSR. It's been on display since 2019, right after hitting 628 miles per hour during tests in South Africa's Kalahari Desert. But the team behind this vehicle isn't satisfied just yet, and they're 99% sure they can go even faster. So, they're planning to bring it back to the track soon, aiming to smash another record. But there's a catch. The team is still looking for a fearless, skilled pilot who can handle speeds over 800 miles per hour. And before you rush to sign up for the challenge, let me remind you, it's going to take more than just guts. You will need a major sponsorship deal too, because getting back this vehicle on the track and breaking that land speed record could cost around $15 million. If you're curious about the fastest jets in the world, look no further. Meet the North American X-15, a legendary aircraft that flew for nearly 10 years and set an unofficial world speed record of 4,520 miles per hour. This beast is so impressive that it actually reached the edge of space during its test flights in the 1960s. Yep, astronauts territory. To put that into perspective, commercial airplanes, like the ones we fly in, usually travel at altitudes of up to 42,000 feet, but the X-15 soared more than 354,000 feet. Now, imagine flying faster than ever before, zooming through the sky at over 5 times the speed of sound. That's exactly what NASA did with this revolutionary aircraft, known as the X-43A. This airplane is scramjet powered, which basically means it's an engine that operates at a supersonic level. It doesn't have any moving parts like regular jet engines do, like turbines. Instead, it uses the plane's speed to push air into the engine. The air gets compressed or squished by the plane's fast motion, then mixed with fuel and burned to produce thrust. For non-experts, this might seem crazy, even dangerous. In fact, we should mention that the first flights of the X-43A weren't exactly smooth sailing. The initial attempt happened back in June of 2001, but the airplane was destroyed after the booster rocket went out of control. Thankfully, The second and third attempts were a huge success, with record-breaking flights that made history. I know elevators aren't the first thing that comes to mind when we think about super-fast means of transportation, but it's only thanks to ultra-modern high-speed elevators that skyscrapers as tall as the Burj Khalifa and Taipei 101 became accessible. One of the fastest elevators in the world is located in the Shanghai Tower in China, which has 128 floors. To get people from the ground floor to the top of the building quickly, the elevator has to move at an incredible speed of 67 feet per second. That's faster than Usain Bolt at his top speed, but just a little slower than a cheetah. Still, it is super fast, about 5 times quicker than the elevators we ride in most buildings. So if you're afraid of heights, speed, and tight spaces, we suggest you avoid going that far.
Well, pack your bags and hurry down to Antarctica, because gold is literally raining from the sky there. $6,000 per day. Well, not exactly from the sky, more like from the eruptions of this massive fiery volcano. The towering beast of a mountain is called Erebus. It looms over the icy, lifeless expanse of Antarctica on Ross Island. It shares the spot with 3 neighbors, Mount Terror, Mount Bird, and Mount Terra Nova. Although Erebus is certainly dominating the place, it's about 12,500 feet tall, like 8 Empire State Buildings. Now, even though it's far smaller than Mount Everest, it's still the southernmost active volcano in the world. And even though it stands in the middle of nowhere, Erebus is far from lifeless. It has a terrible temper, actually. Erebus constantly breathes and roars, throwing out gases and chunks of molten rock in crazy tantrums called strombolian eruptions. And among them, it spews out tiny, delicate specks of shimmering gold. And it's not a couple here and there. This money fountain works every day, spewing out nearly a quarter pound of gold per day. Like we mentioned, it's worth over $6,000. It also sums up to a crazy 64 pounds of gold per year, over $2 million. But before you treasure hunters rush there, we have to tell you that these are more like particles of gold. They're often less than 60 micrometers in size and are scattered around, impossible to collect. And when we say scattered around, we mean it. Some of those particles have been found as far as 620 miles away from the volcano, carried in the middle of nowhere by Antarctic winds. Now, Erebus isn't a super friendly place to hang out next to. Its eruptions are wild and unpredictable. So most of what scientists know about Erebus comes from satellites, which monitor its activity from the safety of space. For scientists, this place is also a gold mine. Erebus is the only volcano that can do this stuff. They figured out that this happens when the magma, superhot semi-molten rock beneath the Earth's surface, rises to the volcanoes. Magma brings some liquid gold with it. The moment it meets the chilly Antarctic air, the gold crystallizes into little pieces, and voila, $2 million per year. Erebus is such a weird and rare volcano. Its fiery heart has been burning for over 1 million years. Over these million years, it's been building layer by layer. Its basis is a super ancient lava, and the upper layers are youngsters. And throughout many years, it's been very active, with a glowing lava lake bubbling at its center. This lava lake is exactly what it sounds, a pool of constantly shifting, burning molten rock. This site is incredibly rare because there are only several lakes like that in the entire world. And this isn't just a pool of rock, it's a window into the volcano's soul. In Erebus, it's made of phonolite. Now, phonolite is a very cool rock. Its name comes from the Greek words for sound and stone. Because, guess what? It's a rock that produces a ringing sound when you strike it. There are only a couple of volcanoes that give it to us. But it's not the only volcano that can flex its weirdness. Oldoyenyo Lengai, a volcano from the East African Rift in northern Tanzania, is even more mysterious. It spews what's called nitrocarbonatite lava. Most volcanoes erupt glowing red-hot rivers of molten rock. But this one erupts dark lava, It flows super fast, like water, creating these thin, fast-moving rivers. So all this makes it look almost like black mud or oil. What's even wilder is that as soon as it hits the air, it starts reacting super fast and turns white within hours. It's like magic, with black lava turning into something that looks like white dust or snow. Not even mentioning that it even glows faintly at night. And it's not that hot either. Well, it's still pretty hot, from about 900 to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But usually, lava temperature can vary from 1,300 to 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's cold by volcanic standards. That's because this lava is rich in some strange soda and salt-like, incredibly rare materials: nerorite and gregarite. Nerorite is usually colorless and shiny, looking like small clear crystals or plates. Gregarite is often a bit cloudy. These guys are a geochemical mystery. Deep inside this place, there are two pools of magma. The rare minerals are probably born when carbon-rich parts of magma get separated from the rest, forming these two pools. And while they're fascinating, and we can get tons of them from this volcano, they're also completely useless. They're so rare and fragile that they're impossible to use in anything, even jewelry. Still, even astronomers find this curious. If there are planets out there that are rich in carbon instead of oxygen, like Earth, these minerals could be quite popular there. This volcano also releases a lot of gas, and I mean a lot. It's spewing out carbon dioxide at a speed of about 176 pounds per 1 second. Just think about it, about 5 tons of carbon dioxide per minute. Every minute, that's like several cars worth of gas being pumped out into our atmosphere. Luckily, our planet is used to this volcano, so it's not that dangerous to us. Meanwhile, in the central Andes, far from human reach, Listaria is having the time of its life. This is also one of the most extraordinary and remote volcanoes in the world. This one is even taller than Erebus, rising to almost 18,700 feet. It's surrounded by a barren, otherworldly landscape. There are literally no humans within 90 miles around it, except for some volcanologists. Listaria is absolutely wild, constantly breathing out hot gases and steam. The air seems almost alive there, shimmering with plumes of vapor escaping from cracks in the ground. These vents, called fumaroles, are more than just hot steam. They're basically chemical labs. They spit out tons of various gases, all of which react with the air and rock around, and what's left behind is something otherworldly. It's like someone spilled a painter's palette: bright yellows, fiery oranges, and rusty reds. But the wildest part are molten sulfur rivers, streams of bright yellow liquid bubbling and flowing down the sides of a volcano. Some of it is still burning, darkening, like some sort of weird s'mores. All that because the sulfur is getting heated to its melting point by the intense heat below and turns into a thick, glowing liquid. Then it starts flowing, cooling, and hardening. You can't tell if you should be fascinated or disgusted by this sight. And if that's not enough to make you feel like you're on another planet, the place itself is just as extreme and crazy. Listaria is perched high on the Altiplano, at the edge of the Atacama Desert, one of the driest places on Earth. Pretty much no rain, and temperatures can plummet to minus 11 degrees Fahrenheit. At least some volcanic ash enriches the soil, so there are some hardy plants here and there. The weirdest part is a salt pan nicknamed Lake of Sulphur. It's fed by those sulfur rivers. It shimmers with minerals all along its shores. This lake used to be way higher in ancient times, but now it's just a shadow of its former self. Thousands of years ago, it witnessed a catastrophe of unimaginable scale. The southeastern side of the volcano, a huge part of it, crumbled and fell in an instant. The ground just gave way, and an avalanche of volcanic rock and ash thundered down the slopes. The landslide raced at terrifying speeds, faster than the fiercest storm, tearing apart everything in its path. It tumbled for 5 miles. When the dust settled, all that was left was a massive scar about half a mile wide. We learned this story from the debris around the place. Ash, pumice, and lapilli all are the shattered remnants of the volcano itself, lying now at its base. Ah, Phoenix. This sizzling gem in the Sonoran Desert isn't just another American city. It's more like a giant oven where you can throw a party, as long as you don't forget the ice. Seriously, if you find yourself here in the summer, brace yourself for some serious heat. We're talking about temperatures that regularly pass 100 degrees. And in 2024, Phoenix hit 110 degrees 55 times during the summer, tying the record set just the year before. Now, I get it if you're not a fan of hot weather, but apparently a lot of people love living in a sauna. Phoenix ranks as the 5th largest city in the United States, and it is the capital and most populous city in Arizona, with 1.7 million residents as of 2024. And if we're talking about the metropolitan area, also known as the Valley of the Sun, the population is almost 5 million. Yet, good luck finding someone actually born here. Out of every 4 Phoenix residents, 3 were born somewhere else. Believe it or not, Phoenix wasn't always this bustling, crowded place. It became one. A few decades ago, it was just a sleepy little dot on the map. Back in the 1940s, the population was around 65,000. It wasn't even close to cracking the top 100 list of the largest U.S. cities. Now, at that time, Phoenix was mostly an agricultural hub, and its economy revolved around what they called the 5 C's: cotton, citrus, cattle, climate, and copper. But things really started to change in the 1950s thanks to one life-changing invention. Drumroll please? The air conditioner. Actually, it was the portable version that came out in 1945, created by an American inventor named Robert Sherman. Phoenix residents owe a lot to Robert for making life bearable during scorching summers. Before AC, people in Phoenix would literally move their beds outside and build sleeping porches. They'd protect that kind of outdoorsy space with light curtains or some kind of net to keep the dust and bugs out. Fun. Anyway, the point is that the air conditioner played a big part in making Phoenix an easier place to live. Since the 1940s, this city in Arizona has transformed from a dusty little town into a sprawling urban jungle, and it's still one of the top 10 fastest-growing metro areas in the U.S. The best part is, it looks like that won't change anytime soon, since this 519-square-mile metropolis is surrounded by rolling desert, with plenty of room to keep growing as far as the eye can see. So, who's dropping everything to move to Phoenix? Well, Californians are the city's biggest fans. According to a recent survey, a third of all new renters moving to Phoenix come from Los Angeles. Okay, that survey might not be the most reliable since it only applies to the source's clients, but it does line up with U.S. Census Bureau data from 2019, which says that 70,000 Californians moved to Arizona in the previous year. The connection between Phoenix and LA is so strong that some people even call Phoenix the next LA. You've got to give Phoenix credit for capitalizing on its proximity to Southern California. The city offers lower taxes, fewer regulations, and lower costs of living, which makes it a magnet for businesses, especially in high-tech and service industries. So, in the 90s, Phoenix was considered a non-stop generator of jobs. In the last few years, we've seen the number of jobs only go up, and the unemployment rate has dropped by nearly half, going from 6.3 in January 2014 to 3.4 in the same month in 2024. Now, when it comes to big city problems, you can't avoid talking about traffic. But here's another reason why Phoenix is a dream city. It doesn't even come close to the traffic nightmares you find in places like LA. Estimates show that people in Los Angeles waste about 119 hours a year just sitting in traffic. But in Phoenix, it's more like 61 hours. Huge difference, huh? And let's not even start talking about the money people waste just sitting in traffic. In LA, drivers burn through about $2,440 worth of gas per year. In Phoenix, they waste 25 gallons of fuel, which ends up costing about $952. Yeah, that's still a lot of cash, but compared to LA, come on, that's a steal. Phoenix being okay in terms of traffic might have a lot to do with how the city was designed. Just take a look at a map of Phoenix. You'll notice it looks like someone took a ruler and drew perfectly straight lines for the roads. That's because the city was laid out in a grid system. This setup makes it so much easier to get around, especially compared to cities full of confusing twists, U-turns, and one-way streets. It just simplifies things, whether you're a local or a tourist. Plus, Phoenix has nice wide streets. Most cities have one major road and a bunch of narrow streets that just can't handle heavy traffic. But Phoenix has wide roads everywhere. So, when the freeways get jammed, you can just hop onto a parallel street and still get to work without stressing out too much. When you look at all the job opportunities and the relatively smooth traffic, it's no wonder people are willing to put up with the heat and move to Phoenix. But don't get it twisted, the heat is no joke. It is really, really hot and sunny out there. We're talking about 300 days of sunshine on average, or about 85% daylight hours per year. But once again, Phoenix has made the best of it. And all that constant sunshine has turned Phoenix into one of the top solar energy cities in the country. Now, you may be wondering, a city in the middle of the desert with barely any rain, do they actually have enough water? Well, they do. Phoenix has its water situation pretty well sorted out, thanks to multiple sources. I mean, they don't rely on rain alone, which is a good thing because, desert life. Most of their water comes from way up north and east of the valley, where snow melts off the mountains and flows into giant reservoirs, storing it up for those dry years. But most of Phoenix's water comes from the Salt River Project, which brings water through canals and pipelines from the Salt and Verde rivers. Then there is the Central Arizona Project, which transports water all the way from the Colorado River. They even get a bit of water from underground wells. And Phoenix doesn't want to waste a drop, so they're smart about recycling, reusing treated water to keep parks green, and even recharging their groundwater. Since Phoenix is all about sunny skies nearly every day of the year, it's normal that people can get a little moody when it actually rains. But here's the thing. Phoenix always gets a surprise up its sleeve, even when it comes to bad weather. When it rains in the deserts, locals get treated to this unique earthy smell. It's thanks to the creosote bush, a desert plant that releases an amazing fragrance when the rain hits it. People describe it as the smell of rain, and honestly, it's one of those fresh, clean scents that makes you forget you're in the desert for a second. And if you've never stopped to think about why Phoenix is called Phoenix, well, it's based on that famous legend of the bird that rises from the ashes. Now, after knowing all the special things about this city and its unique ability to turn challenges into advantages, we can say the name couldn't have been better chosen.